Inside, the chamber stretched for nearly a kilometer in every direction, filled with representatives from species that had conquered worlds before humanity even discovered fire. The air itself shimmered with translation fields, converting the clicks, whistles, and electromagnetic pulses of alien speech into something approaching universal comprehension. Ambassador David Reeves stood at the center platform, a small circular stage suspended by gravitational forces above the main floor. Around him, rising in concentric circles like an ancient amphitheater, sat the delegates of 847 member species. Some floated in containment bubbles. Others perched on specialized seating designed for forms humanity had no proper words to describe. A few existed as clouds of organized particles, their consciousness distributed across volumes of space larger than a human body. David wore a simple black suit. No weapons. No ceremonial decorations. Just a man standing alone before the combined judgment of galactic civilization. Behind him, 2 human security officers stood at attention, their faces professionally blank. The 3 humans looked impossibly small in this place of cosmic power. High Arbiter Velcros dominated the highest tier of the assembly. His species, the Corfin, resembled giant mantises built from living metal, each movement producing harmonics that other species found deeply unsettling. Velcros had ruled the Council for 300 years. He had mediated wars, dissolved empires, and watched entire civilizations rise and fall. He did not expect this session to be remotely challenging. The Council recognizes the delegate from Earth, Velcros announced. His voice translated into a deep bass that resonated through every translation field in the chamber. You stand accused of 17 counts of violating the colonization accords. Settlements have been established on worlds designated as disputed territory, without proper authorization, without environmental surveys, and without compensation to neighboring species with historical claims. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Several species known to be hostile to human expansion chittered with satisfaction. The Torvians, a species of bear-like creatures who had lost a trade dispute with Earth 5 years earlier, leaned forward with obvious interest. David said nothing. He simply stood, hands clasped behind his back, and listened. A holographic display materialized in the air above the assembly. Images appeared, one after another. Satellite photographs of human settlements on distant worlds. Structures clearly built with Earth technology. Agricultural fields arranged in patterns that matched human farming techniques. Ships bearing registration codes from various Earth nations. The evidence is comprehensive, Velcros continued. Surveillance data spans 18 months. We have testimony from the Vrelian Survey Corps, the Crevan Exploration Fleet, and independent commercial observers. All confirm unauthorized human presence on these worlds. More murmurs. Some species began calling for immediate sanctions. The Mandari delegate, a being composed of symbiotic fungal colonies in a vaguely humanoid shape, suggested impounding all human vessels currently in neutral space. A crystalline entity from the Shatter Belt proposed economic embargoes. David remained silent. His face showed no emotion, no anger, no fear. Not even the diplomatic concern that usually appeared when member species faced serious charges. The silence itself began to unnerve some of the delegates. Humans were known for their passionate speeches, their clever arguments, their tendency to challenge authority with uncomfortable questions. This quiet acceptance felt wrong. Ambassador Reeves, Velcros said, a note of impatience entering his translated voice. You have the right to respond to these charges. Does Earth dispute the evidence presented? David looked up at the High Arbiter. His eyes, witnesses would later report, seemed almost sad. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet enough that the translation fields had to amplify it. Before Earth responds, I have one question for the Council. Velcros gestured permission. Speak. Has the Council verified the quantum signatures of these settlements? The question hung in the air like a puzzle no one wanted to solve. Several delegates looked confused. The Vrelian observer shifted uncomfortably in his seating. Quantum signatures were the fundamental fingerprints of manufacturing technology. Every civilization's construction methods left unique quantum markers in materials. It was basic forensic science. Velcros seemed annoyed by the question. The visual evidence is sufficient. Quantum analysis would be redundant and time-consuming. The settlements are clearly human in design and function. I see, David said softly. Then Earth has no further questions. The ease of the response shocked the assembly into momentary silence. Species that had observed human diplomacy for decades knew this wasn't normal. Humans fought. They questioned. They demanded proof and procedure. They didn't simply accept judgment. Velcros recovered quickly. Very well. The Council will now vote on appropriate sanctions. The charges are severe, and the evidence overwhelming. I propose comprehensive measures. Full economic embargo on Earth and all human colonial holdings. Immediate withdrawal from all disputed territories. And restriction of human vessels to designated travel corridors under Council supervision. The vote moved swiftly. Species that feared human competition voted enthusiastically. Species that had conflicts with Earth saw an opportunity to limit a rival. Even neutral parties, convinced by the apparent strength of evidence, cast votes in favor. The sanctions passed with an overwhelming majority. David watched the vote tallies appear on displays throughout the chamber. 801 in favor, 23 abstentions. 23 opposed, mostly species that relied heavily on human trade. The judgment was as definitive as Council votes could be. Earth accepts this Council's judgment, David said clearly. His hand moved to a small device on his wrist, something that looked like an ordinary communication link. He pressed it once. Throughout the Grand Assembly Hall, holographic displays flickered. Every piece of technology with Earth origin components suddenly showed a new interface element, a countdown timer. 72 hours dot, the numbers glowed in angry red against the Council's standard blue interfaces. Medical stations in the Assembly's health wing displayed it. Navigation systems on ships docked at the Council's ports showed it. Even the environmental controls maintaining atmosphere for species that couldn't breathe the standard mix flickered with countdown warnings. Some delegates laughed, thinking it was a gesture of defiance. Empty theater. Others, the ones whose species had studied human technology more carefully, felt the first cold touch of concern. David nodded to his security officers. The three humans turned in perfect unison and began walking toward the chamber's exit. Not running, not hurrying, just walking with calm, measured steps. Their footsteps echoed in the sudden quiet that had fallen over the assembly. Ambassador Reeves, Velcros called out, his voice losing some of its confident authority. Explain the meaning of this countdown. David paused at the doorway. He turned his head slightly, not quite looking back at the assembled species. Humanity is withdrawing from galactic affairs, as the Council has effectively requested. All systems, all agreements, all cooperation will cease in 72 hours. Earth is simply complying with your wishes. You cannot hold the Council hostage with threats, Velcros said, but his voice carried less certainty now. No threats, High Arbiter. Just compliance. David's voice remained perfectly calm. The Council wanted humanity to understand its place in galactic civilization. We understand now. We wish you all prosperity and good fortune. The doors closed behind the three humans with a soft hiss. The silence they left behind was absolute. 847 species sat frozen, staring at the countdown timers. That now marked every piece of human-touch technology in the chamber. Somewhere in the vast assembly, a delegate from the Crevan species made a small, choked sound. He alone seemed to understand what had just happened. But in the confusion of the moment, no one heard him. The countdown continued. 71 hours, 59 minutes, 43 seconds. And across the galaxy, on thousands of worlds and millions of facilities, the same countdown began its inexorable march toward zero. The celebration started within minutes of the human delegation's departure. In the Grand Assembly Hall, delegates from species that had long resented Earth's rapid rise through galactic civilization exchanged satisfied gestures. The Torvians raised their massive paws in triumph. The Crevan delegation sat quietly, but their leader, Ambassador Thalos, felt a growing weight in his chest that had nothing to do with celebration. Across the galaxy, news of the Council's judgments spread through quantum communication networks. Headlines in 1,000 languages proclaimed humanity's humiliation. Analysis programs predicted Earth's economy would collapse within months. Political commentators discussed how other young species would learn from humanity's arrogance. But within the first 6 hours, the first cracks began to appear. On the hospital world of Praxis 9, Dr. Melik was performing a routine surgery on a Vrelian patient when his instruments suddenly displayed the countdown. He blinked at the red numbers superimposed over his usual interface. 70 hours, 12 minutes. The surgical laser in his hand was still functioning, but a warning message scrolled across his vision. Earth Origin Quantum Processor. Functionality will cease in synchronization with network withdrawal. Melik paused mid-procedure. His hands, all 6 of them, froze. The quantum processor controlled the laser's precision down to individual cells. Without it, the laser became a blunt instrument, useful only for crude work. He looked around his surgical theater. Nearly every piece of advanced equipment bore small manufacturer marks he had never paid attention to before. Terratech Solutions, Quantum Dynamics Earth, New Mumbai Medical Innovations, he called his supervisor. Within 20 minutes, they had completed an inventory. 63% of Praxis 9's medical infrastructure incorporated human-designed components. The technology wasn't just human-made. It was human-designed at a quantum level, using mathematical principles that other species had tried and failed to fully replicate. Had 70 hours to find alternatives or patients. Would start dying. Similar discoveries erupted across civilized space. The Helix Station, a major commercial hub serving 17 species, found that its waste recycling systems used human efficiency algorithms. The station manager started calculating how long their reserve capacity would last. 4 days. Maybe 5 if they implemented strict rationing. Jump gates, the ancient structures that made faster-than-light travel possible, began experiencing synchronization errors. The gates themselves were older than most modern species, remnants of some forgotten precursor civilization. But the modern calibration systems that kept them safe and accurate had been refined by human mathematicians 50 years ago. Earth's quantum navigation network constantly updated jump calculations, compensating for stellar drift, gravitational fluctuations, and temporal distortions. Without those updates, jump calculations became increasingly uncertain. The first accident happened 14 hours after the human walkout. A cargo vessel carrying medical supplies jumped from the outer reach toward the Helix Nebula. The calculations were off by 0.03%, a rounding error. Insignificant in normal mathematics, the ship emerged inside a gas giant's upper atmosphere. The crew had exactly 4 seconds to realize their mistake before atmospheric pressure crushed their vessel like paper. 83 people died instantly. The cargo, desperately needed medications for a quarantine zone, was scattered across 3,000 kilometers of hostile atmosphere. News of the accident reached the Council within the hour. High Arbiter Velcros immediately convened an emergency session. The Grand Assembly Hall, so recently filled with celebration, now hummed with nervous energy. This is clearly a negotiation tactic, declared the Torvian ambassador. His voice translated into a defensive growl. The humans are trying to frighten us into reversing our judgment. We must not yield to intimidation. But other voices were less certain. A delegate from the Mendari collective raised concerns about their agricultural worlds, which used human-designed irrigation management systems. The Shatterbelt representative quietly noted that their mining operations relied on human geological prediction software. Ambassador Thalos of the Crevan Assembly rose from his seat. His species resembled aquatic mammals, though they had evolved beyond the need for water. His translated voice carried a tremor that others initially attributed to their species' natural vocalization patterns. "We should reconsider," Thalos said. "Perhaps we acted hastily." Velcro's metallic body produced a sharp harmonic of dismissal. The evidence was overwhelming. Human settlements on 17 worlds. Unauthorized colonization. Clear violations, was it? Thalos asked. Ambassador Reeves asked about quantum signatures. He asked specifically if we had verified them. Did we? The question silenced the chamber. Several delegates looked uncomfortable. The Vrelian observer, who had provided much of the surveillance evidence, shifted his bulk nervously. The visual confirmation was sufficient, Velcros insisted. Quantum analysis takes weeks and requires specialized equipment. The settlements were clearly human in design. But design can be copied, Thalos said quietly. Construction methods can be imitated. If someone wanted to implicate humanity in unauthorized colonization, they would build settlements that looked human. They would use recognizable patterns. They would make it obvious. Murmurs spread through the assembly. The Torvian ambassador bellowed objections, but other species were listening now. The logic was uncomfortable but sound. Velcros raised one-bladed forelimb for silence. This is speculation. Even if the evidence requires additional verification, the sanctions are proportional to the charges. Humanity can appeal once the review period concludes. In 70 hours? Thalos asked. High Arbiter, the countdown suggests we may not have that long. As if to punctuate his words, alerts began appearing on multiple delegates' personal displays. Reports from home worlds. Medical facilities going into emergency mode. Transportation networks reporting calculation errors. Trade systems experiencing processing delays. The economic impact hit next. Galactic financial markets depended on high-speed transaction processing. Human algorithms, developed through centuries of Earth's complex and often chaotic economic systems, managed 73% of interstellar trade clearances. The algorithms didn't just process transactions. They predicted market movements, identified fraud, managed currency exchanges across 17 different economic systems, and maintained the delicate balance that prevented market crashes. Without them, the markets couldn't keep up with transaction volume. Within 20 hours of the human walkout, the central exchange suspended trading. Too many uncompleted transactions. Too many frozen accounts. Too many questions about whether trades were valid. Trillion credit deals sat in limbo. Colonies waiting for supply shipments found their payments unprocessed. Workers on stations across the galaxy couldn't access wages. The economic machine that connected thousands of worlds simply stopped, like an engine suddenly missing its lubricant. Protests began on commercial worlds. Not against humans. Against the Council. Station managers demanded to know why the Council had sanctioned the species whose technology kept civilization functioning. Corporate entities filed emergency injunctions. Banking consortiums called for immediate negotiations with Earth. The Council ignored them. Pride, more than logic, kept Velcros and his supporters committed to their course. They had made a judgment. Reversing it within a single day would make the Council look weak, uncertain, easily manipulated. Better to weather the disruption and prove that galactic civilization didn't depend on one upstart species, but the disruption kept growing. 24 hours after David Reeves walked out of the Grand Assembly Hall, individual species began sending their own delegations to Earth. The Vrelians, desperate to restore their medical systems, dispatched their fastest diplomatic vessel. The Mendari, facing agricultural collapse, sent 3 separate missions. Even the Torvians, still publicly supporting the sanctions, quietly authorized a trade envoy to investigate alternatives. Every single delegation received the same response when they reached the Sol system's edge. Automated defense platforms intercepted them with identical messages. Earth is in compliance with Galactic Council sanctions. No diplomatic contact is authorized. All bilateral agreements are suspended pending Council review. Please direct all inquiries to the High Arbiter. Safe travels. No anger in the message. No threats. Just polite, absolute refusal. The platforms even provided recommended jump coordinates for efficient returns to their home systems. The delegations retreated, reporting back to their governments. Earth's defensive perimeter was functioning perfectly. Human ships were being recalled from across the galaxy, following authorized routes, obeying all traffic protocols. Everything was proceeding with careful, methodical precision. It was the precision itself that terrified the more intelligent observers. This wasn't an emotional response. This wasn't panic or anger. This was a planned, coordinated withdrawal that humanity had clearly prepared for long ago. The countdown wasn't a threat. It was a scheduled dot in the Grand Assembly Hall. As the first day ended and the second began, Ambassador Thalos sat alone in the observation gallery, watching the countdown tick toward 48 hours. He looked at his personal display, reading reports from his home world. Critical systems failing. Backup solutions inadequate. Panic spreading among the population. He thought about David Reeves standing silent in the center of the chamber. That calm, sad expression. The quiet question about quantum signatures. The peaceful acceptance of judgment. Thalos realized, too late, that the human ambassador had known the evidence was fabricated, had known the Council wouldn't check carefully, had known exactly what would happen next. Earth wasn't fighting the Council's judgment. They were teaching the Council a lesson. The question was whether the Council would learn it before the countdown reached 0. The second jump gate accident occurred 41 hours into the countdown. This time, a passenger liner carrying 600 civilians emerged 3 light seconds off course, directly into an asteroid field. The ship's shields absorbed the first impacts, but without proper navigation, the pilot couldn't find clear space. The vessel broke apart over 17 minutes while rescue ships scrambled to respond. They saved 412 passengers. The rest died in the cold vacuum, their final moments spent wondering how such advanced technology could fail so catastrophically. High Arbiter Velcro stood in his private chambers, reviewing casualty reports with mounting dread. The numbers kept growing. Medical deaths on Praxis 9 had reached double digits. Station systems were failing across neutral space. The economic losses had exceeded projections by orders of magnitude. And now, mass casualties from navigation failures. His communication display showed 83 pending requests for emergency council sessions. Species were demanding action. Some wanted negotiations with Earth. Others wanted explanations for why basic infrastructure was collapsing. A few, the ones whose analysts worked faster than their politicians, were asking much more dangerous questions about the fabricated evidence. Velcros had been High Arbiter for 3 centuries. He had maintained order through crisis after crisis. He had never, in all those years, felt the ground shifting beneath him quite like this. A priority alert interrupted his thoughts. Ambassador Thalos requested immediate private audience. Velcros considered refusing, but something in the Kreven's message suggested this was different from the usual political maneuvering. He granted permission. Thalos entered without the usual diplomatic pleasantries. His aquatic features, normally so difficult for other species to read, showed obvious distress. High Arbiter, I must confess something that should have been revealed before the judgment. Velcros felt a cold certainty settle over him. Speak. The evidence against humanity was fabricated. My government was part of a coalition that created it. Thalos' words came in a rush, as if confession could somehow lighten the burden. 5 species, including the Krevans, the Torvians, and 3 others, whose names I am authorized to reveal. We feared Earth's growing influence. Human technology was appearing everywhere. Human diplomats were forming alliances. Human trade was dominating markets. We thought a minor sanction would slow their expansion. You fabricated evidence to deceive the Council? Velcro's voice dropped to a dangerous harmonic. Yes, but we never imagined the Council would impose such severe penalties. We expected a formal reprimand, perhaps restrictions on settlement rights in specific sectors. And we certainly never imagined humans would actually leave. Thalos gestured helplessly. High Arbiter, humanity knew. That question Ambassador Reeves asked about quantum signatures, he already knew the settlements weren't human. Their intelligence services had identified the fabrication weeks before the trial. The implications crashed through Velcro's mind like a collapsing star. They knew and said nothing? They let us proceed. They let the Council judge them on false evidence. They wanted to see what we would do. Thalos pulled up a data file. I have the actual quantum signatures from the disputed settlements. They match Torvian construction methods, but the Torvians used human-style architecture to make the deception convincing. A basic forensic analysis would have revealed it immediately. Velcro stared at the data. The evidence was damning, clear, indisputable. If they had simply followed standard verification protocols, none of this would have happened. But the visual evidence had been so compelling, and the Council had been so eager to believe that the troublesome humans had finally overreached. Why confess now? Velcros asked. Because my whole world's infrastructure is collapsing. Because people are dying. Because I cannot live with the consequences of our deception. Thalos met Velcro's gaze. And because humanity is teaching us all a lesson about the responsibility of power. They could have exposed us during the trial. Instead, they're showing the entire galaxy what happens when the Council acts without proper verification. Before Velcros could respond, another priority alert screamed across his display. The defense perimeter. The galaxy's outer defensive network was experiencing cascading failures. The perimeter had been established 200 years ago after hostile forces from another galaxy attempted an invasion. Massive satellites ringed the explored regions, providing early warning and coordinated defense against external threats. The hardware was built by the Torvian Empire at enormous expense. But the targeting systems, the coordination protocols, the AI that managed threat assessment, all of that had been upgraded with human technology over the past 20 years. Without regular updates, the AI was degrading. Machine learning systems needed constant refinement. Without new data from Earth's vast sensor networks, the defense satellites were becoming increasingly unreliable. Worse, long-range sensors had detected an anomaly at the edge of explored space. A probe of unknown origin, moving at relativistic speeds, headed toward inhabited systems. The defense network should have been analyzing it, determining threat levels, coordinating response protocols. Instead, the network was producing error messages and conflicting assessments. Velcros accessed the Defense Command Center. Military officers from a dozen species were frantically trying to compensate for failing systems. Without the human AI coordination, they had to manually process data that should have been automated. The probe would reach populated space in 6 days. They had no idea if it was hostile. The countdown continued. 27 hours remaining. emergency council sessions became continuous. The Grand Assembly Hall never emptied now. Delegates arrived, argued, demanded, and left to brief their governments, only to return when new crises emerged. The chamber had become a monument to cascading failure. Species began taking unilateral action. The Vrelian Medical Authority announced they were sending ships to Earth regardless of council sanctions. They would beg, bribe, or trade anything to restore their medical systems. Lives were more important than politics. The Mindari agricultural worlds declared emergency conditions. Their food production was dropping by the hour. Without human irrigation management, they were reverting to primitive farming methods that couldn't sustain their population. Commercial entities across the galaxy simply ignored the sanctions. If the Council couldn't maintain basic infrastructure, corporations argued, then the Council's authority was meaningless. Ships began attempting the journey to Sol System, hoping Earth would respond to private overtures, even if they refused diplomatic contact. Every single attempt met the same automated response. Earth was in compliance with Council sanctions. No contact authorized. The defense platforms that delivered these messages were functioning perfectly, highlighting the cruel irony. Human automated systems worked flawlessly. It was only the systems that required human maintenance that were failing. In a small office deep within the Grand Assembly Complex, a xenoarchaeologist named Dr. Venn made a discovery that would change everything. She wasn't even supposed to be working. With the crisis consuming all attention, most research facilities were operating on skeleton crews. But Venn couldn't stop thinking about something she had seen in ancient ruins on MENDAX-4. The ruins predated the Council by millennia. They showed evidence of advanced civilization, sophisticated technology, and complex social organization. But the language had always resisted translation. Every pattern recognition algorithm had failed to crack it. Venn had a strange thought. What if the algorithms were failing because they were looking for alien patterns? What if the language wasn't as foreign as everyone assumed? She fed the runic inscriptions into a translation matrix built on human linguistic principles. The breakthrough was immediate and stunning. The language wasn't alien at all. It was a Proto-Indo-European dialect, evolved far beyond anything spoken on modern Earth, but recognizably human in structure. The ruins were human, ancient human, from a civilization that had existed 200,000 years ago. Venn's hands shook as she processed more inscriptions. The story they told was impossible, and yet perfectly explained everything happening in the galaxy right now. She immediately filed an emergency report to the Council, flagged with the highest priority codes she could access. The report arrived on Velcros, display at the same moment another gate accident was reported. The High Arbiter almost dismissed it. Another irrelevant research paper in the middle of a civilizational crisis. But the first line of the abstract stopped him cold. Evidence suggests current human civilization represents a return to the galaxy by humanity's ancestors who founded the original Galactic Council. Velcros opened the full report. He read it twice, checking the data, verifying the translation matrices, confirming the archaeological evidence. Everything checked out. Dr. Venn had done her work with meticulous care. 200,000 years ago, an earlier human civilization had been the galaxy's guiding force. They had shared technology, promoted peace, helped younger species develop. The Council itself was built on principles established by ancient humans. Then came the schism. The details were fragmentary, but the pattern was clear. Younger species grew resentful of human guidance. They believed they were being controlled, limited, kept from achieving their full potential. A coalition formed. They acted against humanity, using the very council structures humans had helped create. Humanity didn't die. They withdrew. They went home to their remote system in an unremarkable arm of the galaxy and waited. They watched as the younger species claimed human achievements as their own. They observed as the Council forgot its own origins. And they tested whether, given time and another chance, the galactic community would make better choices. The countdown reached 24 hours. Across the galaxy, species stared at displays showing failures multiplying faster than solutions could be implemented. The most advanced civilization in the galaxy was discovering that it had been built on a foundation it didn't understand and couldn't maintain alone. Velcro stood in the Grand Assembly Hall, holding Dr. Ven's report, and finally understood what David Reeves' sad expression had meant. The human ambassador had been watching the Council repeat ancient mistakes. He had been giving them one more chance to choose wisdom over expedience. They had failed. And now humanity was teaching them the cost of that failure, not through violence or domination, but through simple absence. The High Arbiter made his decision. Pride could no longer matter. The Council's authority meant nothing if civilization itself collapsed. He initiated a priority communication request to Ambassador David Reeves, not as a Council representative demanding answers, but as a supplicant requesting mercy. David Reeves stood in a small observation room aboard the human research station Ptolemy, watching stars drift past the viewport. The station orbited a brown dwarf in neutral space, maintained as a scientific outpost for studying exotic stellar phenomena. It was modest by galactic standards, housing fewer than 200 researchers and support staff. David had chosen it specifically because of its simplicity. When Velcro's communication request arrived, David let it wait for exactly 1 hour before responding. Not out of spite, but to give the High Arbiter time to understand what asking for this meeting truly meant. A leader who had ruled for 3 centuries was about to request an audience with a species he had sanctioned less than 3 days ago. The response David finally sent was brief. He would meet with Velcros privately, not at the Grand Assembly Hall, not on any Council-controlled territory. Here, at the Ptolemy Station, the High Arbiter could come alone or with minimal security, as he preferred. Velcros arrived 12 hours later in a small diplomatic courier, accompanied by only 2 attendants. The proud being who had commanded the Grand Assembly now moved through the Ptolemy's simple corridors with visible discomfort. Human architecture wasn't designed for Corthan physiology, and Velcro's metallic limbs, scraped occasionally against doorframes, built for more compact forms. David waited in a conference room barely large enough for 6 people. A simple table, basic chairs modified to support various body types, a viewport showing the brown dwarf's sullen glow, no ceremonial decorations, no displays of power, just a room where 2 beings could talk honestly. When Velcros entered, David gestured to a seat. The High Arbiter's species didn't truly sit, but the station had provided a platform calibrated to support his weight at a comfortable height. Velcros positioned himself across from David, his translated voice carrying none of its usual commanding harmonics. "Thank you for agreeing to meet, Ambassador Reeves." David poured himself coffee from a simple thermal container. The smell filled the room, a distinctly earth scent in this neutral space. "You requested this meeting, High Arbiter." "I'm listening." Velcro seemed uncertain how to begin. For a being who had mediated disputes between star-spanning empires, this intimate setting clearly unsettled him. Finally, he accessed his personal display and projected the data into the air between them. "We have discovered the evidence was fabricated. Ambassador Thalos of the Crevan Assembly has confessed to participating in a conspiracy involving 5 species. They created false settlements designed to appear human and presented them as proof of unauthorized colonization." David sipped his coffee. His expression remained neutral. "I see. You knew," Velcro said. "It wasn't a question. We knew. Why didn't you expose the conspiracy during the trial?" David set down his coffee cup carefully. "Because exposing it would have solved the immediate problem without addressing the deeper issue. The Council would have apologized, punished the conspirators, and continued exactly as before. Nothing would have changed. Velcro's body produced a low harmonic that his species used to express confusion. What needed to change? Everything, David said simply. High Arbiter, how much do you know about the archaeological discoveries on Mendax 4? The shift in topic seemed to catch Velcros off guard. Dr. Ven's report reached me. Ancient human civilization. Claims that humanity founded the original council structures. I confess, I'm still processing the implications. Let me help you process them. David pulled up his own display, showing images of the Mendax 4 ruins. 200,000 years ago, humanity reached the stars. We found a galaxy filled with younger civilizations, species still learning to navigate interstellar space. We shared our technology. We helped establish peaceful cooperation. We created the frameworks that became the Galactic Council. Velcros remained silent, listening. But helping isn't the same as controlling, David continued. Some species began to resent our guidance. They believed we were limiting their potential, keeping them dependent. A coalition formed, led by species who wanted to prove they could govern themselves without human oversight. They used the very council structures we had helped create to vote us out. The schism, Velcro said quietly. Yes, but here's what matters, High Arbiter. That ancient human civilization could have fought. They had technology centuries beyond anyone else. They could have enforced their vision of galactic order. Instead, they chose to leave. They went home to Earth and waited. David stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at the brown dwarf's dim light. They waited to see if the younger species would learn wisdom or if they would repeat the same patterns of suspicion and rivalry that humans themselves had once struggled with. 200,000 years is a long time to wait, but humans are patient when we need to be. And we failed the test, Velcro said. His translated voice carried something that might have been shame. Not failed. Not yet. David turned back to face him. But you didn't pass it either. When the evidence against us appeared, it was designed to exploit your pre-existing suspicions. It confirmed what many species already believed, that humans were expansionist and aggressive. The Council accepted that narrative without proper verification because it fit your assumptions. Velcros processed this. The quantum signatures. Your question during the trial. A test within a test. If the Council had followed basic verification protocols, you would have discovered the fabrication immediately. We gave you the specific tool you needed. You chose not to use it. Because we were certain we were right. Yes, David sat back down. And that certainty, High Arbiter, is the real problem. Not the specific conspiracy. Not the fabricated evidence. The problem is a system that allows judgment without verification, that permits action based on assumptions, that values speed over accuracy. Velcros was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had changed. Less defensive. More genuine. What do we do now? The galaxy is collapsing. People are dying. The countdown has reached 18 hours. Now you learn, David said. You learn that authority comes with responsibility. That power requires wisdom. That judging others demands you first judge your own processes. He pulled up another display, showing the cascade of failures across galactic civilization. Look at this, High Arbiter. Every failing system represents something humans contributed to galactic society. Medical technology, navigation systems, economic algorithms, defense coordination. We didn't force these on anyone. Species adopted them because they worked better than the alternatives. You're saying we became dependent on you. No, I'm saying you became integrated with us. That's different. Dependence is weakness. Integration is partnership. But partnership requires mutual respect and trust. The Council broke that trust by acting without verification. So we're showing you what partnership actually means. Velcro's entire posture changed. The proud ruler who had entered this room was gone, replaced by someone genuinely trying to understand. You're not punishing us. You're teaching us. Yes, the same lesson our ancestors tried to teach 200,000 years ago. The same lesson they hoped the galaxy would learn in their absence. David leaned forward. High Arbiter, humans don't want to rule the galaxy. We want to be partners in it. But partnership only works when all parties approach it with honesty and care, when the Council is willing to verify before judging. When species work together instead of competing for dominance. How do we fix this? Velcros asked. The practical question, Ambassador. Systems are failing. People need help. I'll restore the systems, David said. But under conditions. The Council must establish independent verification protocols for all future accusations. Any species found fabricating evidence faces immediate expulsion, and humanity receives a permanent seat on a reformed security committee, with veto authority over judgments involving insufficient evidence. The Council will accept these terms. I'm not finished. David's voice hardened slightly. The Council must also acknowledge its true history, the ancient human role in its founding, the schism, all of it. The galaxy needs to understand that this isn't the first time we've had to make this choice, and the consequences of making it wrong. Velcros considered this. For a being who had spent 3 centuries maintaining the Council's dignity and authority, the idea of publicly revealing such foundational flaws must have been painful. But he nodded. Agreed, all of it. Whatever is necessary to prevent this from happening again. David smiled for the first time since the meeting began. It was a tired smile, but genuine. Good. Then let's save your civilization, High Arbiter. He accessed his communication device and sent a series of commands. Across the galaxy, the countdown stopped with 16 hours and 47 minutes remaining. Human systems began reactivating. Medical equipment resumed normal function. Jump gates recalibrated with fresh data. Trade networks started processing their massive backlogs of transactions. The defense perimeter came back online, just as the mysterious probe was finally identified. Not a weapon, not a threat, just a research probe from a distant civilization, carrying greetings and scientific data. Without the human-maintained defense AI, the galaxy had nearly attacked it out of fear. There's one more thing you should understand, David said as the reactivation proceeded. Every human system includes safeguards. We can't be expelled from galactic civilization by simple vote anymore. Not because we're forcing our presence, but because removing us would require replacing centuries of integrated technology. That integration was never meant as leverage. It was meant as insurance. To make sure that next time someone tried to push humanity out, they would have to think very carefully about the consequences. Velcros produced a harmonic that might have been a laugh. You planned this entire scenario. We planned for the possibility. We hoped it wouldn't be necessary. David finished his coffee. But humans learned something 200,000 years ago, High Arbiter. We learned that you can't force wisdom on people. You can only create circumstances where wisdom becomes the obvious choice. The Council is choosing wisdom now. Not because we demanded it, but because you've seen what happens without it. The two of them sat in silence for a moment, watching through the viewport as the brown dwarf continued its ancient, patient rotation. Finally, Velcros rose to leave. Thank you, Ambassador Reeves, for the lesson and for the mercy. Thank you for being willing to learn, David replied. Not every species can admit error. The fact that you're here, that you're willing to change, that gives me hope for all of us. After Velcros left, David stood alone in the conference room. He thought about the ancient humans who had made the same choice so long ago, who had walked away rather than force their vision on a reluctant galaxy. He wondered if they would approve of how their descendants had handled this test. Outside, stars continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the small dramas of mortal civilizations. But within those civilizations, something fundamental had shifted. The galaxy had learned that humanity's strength wasn't in domination, but in patience, in the willingness to step back and let others face the consequences of their choices, and in the wisdom to return when asked. The Grand Assembly Hall looked different when it reconvened 3 months after the crisis. The physical structure was unchanged, still a massive crystalline monument floating in the void. But something fundamental had shifted in the space itself. The air of absolute authority that once dominated every session had been replaced by something more careful, more thoughtful. High Arbiter Velcros opened the session with words that would have been unthinkable before the human withdrawal. This council convenes today to acknowledge errors in judgment and to establish new protocols to prevent their recurrence. We begin with a formal acknowledgement of our history, a history that has been hidden or forgotten for 200,000 years. Holographic displays materialized throughout the chamber, showing the Mendax 4 ruins and the translations that had revealed their origins. The assembled species watched as the evidence unfolded. Ancient human artifacts, linguistic patterns that predated modern galactic civilization, archaeological proof of a technological society that had explored these same stars millennia before the current council existed. Humanity did not suddenly appear in our galaxy, Velcros continued. They returned to it. The foundations of our modern council, the principles of peaceful cooperation and mutual development, these were originally human concepts. Our ancestors received this gift and then chose to forget its source. The revelation rippled through the assembly. Some species had suspected pieces of the truth. Others were hearing it for the first time. The Torvians, who had been so eager to see humanity sanctioned, sat in uncomfortable silence. Their own ancestors had been among the leaders of the ancient schism, though modern Torvians had no memory of it. Ambassador David Reeves sat at a new position in the chamber, not in the center platform where accused species stood, but at the primary council table alongside Velcros and the other senior representatives. His seat bore a simple plaque, Human Representative Security Committee. The reforms had been implemented swiftly once the crisis forced action. Every accusation brought before the council now required independent verification by at least 3 different investigative bodies. Species found fabricating evidence faced automatic expulsion and sanctions. The Security Committee expanded to include humanity and 3 other previously marginalized species, held veto power over judgments involving insufficient evidence. But the real changes went deeper than official protocols. The crisis had forced every species to examine their assumptions about humanity and about their own capabilities. The Vrelian Medical Authority had spent the past months working with human researchers to truly understand the quantum medical technology they had been using for decades. Not just operating it, but comprehending the principles behind it. Dr. Melek, the surgeon whose instruments had nearly failed during the crisis, now taught seminars on quantum precision techniques. He had learned something profound during those desperate hours when his equipment counted down toward failure. Using technology you didn't understand made you dependent. Understanding it made you a partner god. Similar awakenings happened across every field, where human technology had become integrated into galactic civilization. The Mandari agricultural specialists discovered that human irrigation algorithms weren't magic. They were based on complex mathematical models that, once explained, the Mandari could modify and improve for their specific needs. The relationship shifted from dependency to collaboration. The jump gate operators formed a joint task force with human navigators. Together, they began developing next-generation calibration systems that combined human quantum mathematics with Torvian engineering precision. The result was safer and more efficient than either species could have achieved alone. Ambassador Thalos of the Crevan Assembly rose to speak. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by confession and consequence. His government had fallen in the scandal's aftermath. He remained as ambassador only to see through the reforms he had helped necessitate. My species offers formal apology to humanity and to this council. We allowed fear to drive us toward deception. We believed that limiting human influence would protect our own position in galactic affairs. Instead, we nearly destroyed the civilization we sought to protect. David listened without expression. The Crevans had paid heavily for their conspiracy. Economic sanctions from species angry about the crisis. Loss of trade agreements. Political isolation. But David had argued against permanent punishment. The goal wasn't revenge, but education. The Crevan Assembly accepts your apology, David said when Thalos finished. And we propose that your species take the lead in establishing the new Independent Verification Bureau. Your experience with evidence fabrication, unfortunately, makes you uniquely qualified to detect it in others. The suggestion shocked the Assembly. Placing the conspirators in charge of preventing future conspiracies seemed absurd. But David's logic was sound. Who better to recognize deception than those who had practiced it? Thalos accepted the responsibility with visible relief. His species had been given a path to redemption. The session continued for hours, establishing frameworks, voting on proc. The Grand Assembly Hall floated in the void like a massive jewel, its crystalline walls reflecting the light of 1,000 distant stars. Edgers discussing implementation. It was tedious work, a kind of administrative detail that rarely made for compelling viewing. But it was necessary. Civilization wasn't maintained by grand gestures, but by careful attention to process. During a recess, Velcros approached David in one of the chamber's private alcoves. The High Arbiter had changed since their meeting on the Ptolemy station. He moved with less certainty, asked more questions, listened more carefully. Ambassador Reeves, I have a question that troubles me. Your people planned for this scenario. You integrated your technology so deeply into our civilization that removing you would cause collapse. Was this always meant as leverage? David considered the question carefully. Let me answer with another question, High Arbiter. When you build a bridge between two cliffs, is the bridge leverage over the people who use it, or is it simply infrastructure that serves everyone? Infrastructure doesn't shut down when you're displeased. It does when it's not maintained, David replied. Human systems require human maintenance, not because we designed them that way to create dependence, but because that's the nature of complex technology. The jump gate calibrations need updates because stellar drift is constant. The medical quantum processors need refinement because biological systems vary. The economic algorithms need adjustment because markets evolve. He gestured toward the viewport, where ships from 100 species moved through nearby space. We could have designed simpler systems that required less maintenance. They would have been less effective, less efficient, less sophisticated. We gave the galaxy our best work, knowing that our best work would require ongoing partnership. That wasn't leverage. That was an invitation. An invitation we nearly rejected, Velcro said. Nearly. But you didn't. When it mattered, when you had to choose between pride and survival, you chose wisely. That's all we ever hoped for. Velcros produced a harmonic of acknowledgement. I wonder what your ancestors would think, seeing this moment. David smiled. I think they'd be relieved. They waited 200,000 years to find out if the galaxy could learn this lesson. Now they know. The session resumed, and the work continued. By the end of the day, the new protocols were established. The Independent Verification Bureau would begin operations within a month. The Reformed Security Committee would meet weekly to review all pending judgments. and the Council formally acknowledged humanity's historical role in its founding, with plans for a memorial to be constructed at the Grand Assembly Hall. But perhaps the most significant change wasn't captured in any official protocol. It was visible in how species interacted with each other and with the humans among them. The automatic assumptions, the casual dismissal of human perspectives, the underlying resentment of human success, all of it had been burned away by the crisis. In its place was something more valuable than authority or fear. It was respect earned through demonstrated competence and patience. Humanity had shown the galaxy that they could walk away from civilization if necessary. And having shown it, they no longer needed to prove it. 6 months after the crisis, David Reeves received a private message from the Earth Archives, the organization responsible for maintaining humanity's long memory. They had been preparing for this moment since the crisis began, since they realized the galaxy was finally ready to hear the full truth. The message was simple. The Historical Preservation Committee has voted to release the complete archives of the First Galactic Era. Public access begins tomorrow. Thought you'd want to know before the galactic news networks reported. David sat in his quarters on the Ptolemy station, which had become a semi-permanent diplomatic outpost. He thought about the stories those archives would tell, the triumphs of ancient humanity spreading across the stars, the mistakes they made in their early dealings with younger species, the wisdom they gained through failure, the difficult choice to leave rather than dominate, the long wait across millennia. The galaxy would learn that humanity's patience wasn't just a personality trait. It was a survival strategy developed across hundreds of thousands of years. Humans had learned that rushing toward solutions often created more problems than it solved. They had learned that sometimes the best action was inaction, waiting for the right moment rather than forcing a wrong one. And they had learned that power was most effective when it didn't need to be displayed. The next day, as the archives became available across galactic networks, something unexpected happened. Species began sharing their own hidden histories. The Torvians revealed records of their ancestors' role in the schism, including details of how they had rationalized betraying their human partners. The Vrelians published medical journals from the early days after humanity's withdrawal, showing how they had struggled to maintain technologies they didn't fully understand. One by one, civilizations that had spent millennia constructing perfect histories of themselves began acknowledging their flaws and failures. The humans had shown that honesty about weakness could coexist with strength, that admitting error didn't diminish authority, but enhanced it through authenticity. 10 years after the crisis, a young Crevan student named Pollux wrote a thesis that became required reading in diplomatic academies across the galaxy. The thesis examined what became known as the 72-hour lesson, analyzing how humanity had used strategic withdrawal to teach galactic civilization about verification, trust, and the true nature of power. Pollux's conclusion resonated across species. Humanity did not save us through their technology. They saved us by showing us that we needed saving and then waiting for us to ask for help. This is the essence of wisdom, knowing when to act and when to allow others to face the consequences of their choices. Ambassador David Reeves, reading the thesis in his retirement on Earth, smiled at the words. The student understood. The galaxy understood. It had taken 200,000 years. A conspiracy, a crisis, and a countdown. But the lesson had finally been learned. Humanity had walked out in silence. And in that silence, the galaxy had finally learned to listen. Outside David's window, the city of New Shanghai stretched toward the horizon, its towers reaching for the stars that humanity had visited twice across their long history. Ships moved overhead, some bearing human crews, others carrying aliens who now came to Earth, not as supplicants but as partners. David thought about those ancient humans who had made the first withdrawal, who had trusted that given enough time, the galaxy would mature. They had been right. It had taken longer than anyone could have predicted, but they had been right. Somewhere in the archives, there was a message those ancient humans had left for their descendants. David had read it many times, but he pulled it up now, reading the words again. To those who come after, do not despair when the galaxy forgets us. Do not rage when they claim our work as their own. Wait, watch. When they are ready, they will ask. And when they ask, answer. Not with dominance, but with partnership. Not with anger, but with patience. Show them that strength is not in controlling others, but in knowing when to step back and let them find their own way. This is the human gift to the galaxy, the freedom to fail and the grace to try again. David closed the file. Outside, stars were beginning to appear in Earth's evening sky, the same stars humanity had reached for across countless generations. The same stars they would continue to explore, not alone, but alongside civilizations who had finally learned to be partners rather than subjects. The long walk had ended. The real journey was just beginning, and this time they would walk it together,